Okay, welcome aboard, wonderful people. So pleased to see you filing in. I always like the start of a webinar because I get to find out who are the ridiculously obsessive, compulsive, punctual people, just like me. So welcome, if that's you. Good to see some familiar faces, not faces, I suppose, but familiar names in there for me. Welcome, Naz. Great to see you here. Kelly, welcome along. Good to have you here as well. A little bit like the old days. If you're as old as me, you'd remember Romper Room and looking through the magic mirror or something like that to see who the names were in the room. But welcome, fabulous to have you here. I'm gonna jump into it reasonably quickly today because it's a topic that I want to make sure I don't sort of truncate at the end of it. I want to make sure I get through everything that you need today, because that's what I'm trying to do, is to be as of service as I possibly can for you. We're never quite sure. And I guess that's one of the themes of today is being never quite sure, being uncertain. How concepts like this are going to land, how people are going to respond to the idea of educational leaders trying to navigate how to lead through periods of uncertainty. And we've had 85 people register for the webinar today. So that tells us something, that there's quite a lot of school leaders out there at the moment who are certain that they need some help with uncertainty. So I'm going to get stuck into it today with a quick reminder, and that is just to please remember that you're not watching Netflix, that I sit here today not as a TV show that's been perfectly produced for you. You will see me glance to the side and look at my phone because my team will be texting me anything that's going on that I need to pay attention to. You'll see me with my arm out like this, reaching out because I'm moving from one platform to the other to see what's going on. Miss Merv's here, and she's noticed that I'm looking in the chat box there to see that there are people here. So you'll see me do these little things from time to time. And what they are, when I'm not looking down the barrel at you, is a reminder to you that you can interact. So if there is something that you want to do to contribute today, whether it's through the chat box, whether it's by even putting your hand up, you'll see me occasionally do this and I'll lean over and I'll be scrolling through the attendee list just to see if there's anyone there who's got their hand up and wants to ask a question or perhaps make a statement about the things that I'm saying, then please know you can do that. All right. So we're going to get started. And what I want to do to get this going is kind of put this in some sort of contemporary relevant context for you. I don't know how many of you have been watching Netflix through lockdown periods, and I'm taking a little guess there that there are a lot of people here today, and I know this from looking at the attendee list, that there's a lot of people here from Victoria, from New South Wales, and from the ACT, where uncertainty is something that we're all traversing at the moment. But in lockdown periods, there tends to be a fair bit of Netflixy type action that happens on weekends when there's not much else to do. And I recently got myself involved in a flavour of the month. And we've got someone there who's an addict. Okay, so we get it. All right, that's great. And one of the ones I did get sucked into watching was Squid Game. Now, and one scene got me about this on the weekend, and it was, they have an activity called tug of war. Now, just to do a little spoiler alert here, if you're thinking about taking my recommendation to watch Squid Game, first of all, know that a lot of people die. All right, there is a lot of violence in this one, and some of it's not completely explicable, but I guess you get that, don't you, when you decide that you're going to sit down and watch a Korean miniseries. There's a scene in there where two teams are pitted against each other in tug of war in one of the games that they play. And it's pretty gruesome because if you lose the tug of war, you die. You fall off a great big platform. Not great, not good fun. And there's a group that's chosen where some of the main characters are in a group of 10, and they're chosen to compete against another group at random. And it's quite obvious when they stand, the other group, to our little band of heroes, is the stronger group. They're bigger. There's more males in the group. They decided to stack their group that way, just in case it was a game of strength. And they don't have much time to plan, because failure would mean that they die, that it's, there's no option other than try to find a way to win, even though the other group's stronger, even though the other group, if they just bring pure effort, each group on a piece of rope, they're in trouble. And so they don't have much time, but they do have a lift ride while they go up to the platform. And there's a short conversation that happens where they talk about, and particularly an old man in the group who, just spoiler alert, turns out to be an evil genius, so don't listen too much to him. But he talks about team, he talks about group, and he talks about prior history, knowledge that he has that allows them to be able to, as a group, come together in such a way that we can make it harder for the group that is better at the effort thing. And it struck me when I was watching this, this is all about even if you've only got a little bit of preparation time, the preparing is better than effort. And what they do when they get in there is they take the brace position that you can see on the screen there, where they all lean back and try to, as it was explained so eloquently in Squid Game, try to see the crotch of the person behind you. They lean back like that and they absorb some of the energy at first. They're not trying to make progress. They're not trying to win in the first 15 or 10 seconds. They're just trying to kind of absorb the pressure that comes. And I think for us that are coming into periods where students are returning to school from extended periods of lockdown, I reckon there's permission to do that. To say that in the initial stages, it's not going to be about the fact that we need to make progress quickly. What we need to do is to hold. We need to let some of that initial angst and energy that their young people are going to return with be absorbed, and just be the ones who can absorb it, be the ones who can take it. And they talk about 3 separate tactics that they have deployed on the way up. One is to take this butt brace position. 2 is that they yank in jerking sort of movements. They move back, move back, move back, and then it still isn't enough. And they start to get pulled towards the line, and they do something incredibly clever, and that is to take 3 steps forward. And what they do, instead of just exerting effort in order to sustain tension, is they release all of it. They just let it go. And what do you know? The other people on the other side of the platform fall over, and eventually they pull them in and they all die. So the team of underweighted heroes get the win. Why did they get the win? I think they just had some preparation time, and they used some of the wisdom about how you can bring people together. And that's the challenge that I think is before you in uncertainty. Some of the circumstances, some of the games that you're going to be asked to play over the next, maybe it's a couple of months, but maybe it's another 12 months. You are going to need to bring your people together in order to give yourself the best possible chance of succeeding. Now, my synthesis of this is that there are about half a dozen things you can do, about 6 things that you can do that will allow you to deal successfully with uncertainty. And that's what I want to bring to you today. So what you'll find from a leadership point of view is that I have a bent for the practical, and I'm going to try and give you some things that are practical. I just can't do an hour with you without giving you some stuff that you can do straight away. But you will find an element in our work today that speaks to the theoretical, that speaks to mindset, that speaks to paradigm. And so I want you to, even if you've got the opportunity, to sort of grab the post-it notes if that's how you're inclined, and perhaps get some yellow, which is for the practical, and perhaps get a different color, which is for the theoretical, because you might want to separate those as we go. One of the things that I want you to do as a group, as a leader, even if you need to do this individually before you start, is to conduct what we call a pre-mortem. Now, a pre-mortem, and that might be a term that sounds a little odd for you. You might be thinking, don't you mean post-mortem? Isn't that the one that we hear all the time when you watch a TV show where they try to work out as a detective, how did this person die? And I'll go backwards in time from the moment. A post-mortem kind of comes too late. The person's already dead. So what we want to do is conduct a pre-mortem, which is we ask ourselves what could kill it. And this is something that in our planning we don't do often enough, because we plan, and if I may be, I'm a pretty optimistic person, but we plan too optimistically. We plan for everything to work, and we never stop and think about what could kill all our wonderful intentions. So if you as a leader or as a leadership team were to stop here for a moment and say, what are the big risks? What are the risks involved in being able to bring our students back to school successfully? What are the risks involved in getting our parent community on side? What are the risks involved in reconnecting our staff members? What are the risks even around the COVID stuff and getting that done in the school? What would they be? How could we get to work on that? There are some latent risks that sit within your school community. There are some people who are risky within your school community, and stopping occasionally to think, who are they and what do we need to do so that our bigger and more optimistic plans have some sort of chance of success, can stop the whole thing bursting like the balloon that's about to land on the screen there. Now, to give you a little window into real schools, we kind of do this. Whenever we launch something new, I'm often either having a conversation in my head or with my team or with other members in my team about some questions that we ask ourselves. And if we ask ourselves, because sometimes there's a great excitement about launching something new for schools to use, and we think this will be really successful and it's going to be fabulous and they're all going to love it and it's going to be great. But there's some questions that I ask myself, and that is, first of all, how could this go absolutely pear-shaped? And it's usually associated with three things. One is that the message was wrong. People actually didn't need help with this. And I've got to admit, I had a moment when I decided I was going to run a webinar on uncertainty. Are people going to show up for that? Do people really need that? Is the message right? And I've made a bit of a bet that it would be. And we'll talk about that thinking in just a little later. And what do you know? I get the opportunity to be of service to 85 people today, which is fabulous. The second thing that could go wrong is the market doesn't need it. So it might just be something that they don't want to do a webinar on this topic. Maybe they want a white paper on it, or maybe they want me to release a video on it, or maybe they'd rather that there was some other resource or an infographic that I put out about it, but they don't want to get it this way. And the third thing is we didn't do the work. So there are three reasons that your plans might go awry there. One is the message of your plan all wrong? And I think if you look at some of even the governmental message that's gone out from both federal and state levels around Australia, some of it's been quite badgery. And I think people just don't want to hear it. And even around the vaccine stuff, there's some people who agree but just don't want to be told. Sometimes we're trying to put things out there that people don't need. The COVID Safe app that came out a long time ago, that we just didn't need it. We needed other ways to deal with it than that. And sometimes we just don't do the work. If we look at some of the things that we had that were just great ideas and people needed it, but we just didn't put the effort and the energy behind it to give it the chance to succeed, then we find ourselves in a little bit of trouble. So concept number one is that I would love you and your people to sit down as leaders and have a conversation about what could screw this up monumentally if we don't attend to it right now. Concept number two that I want you to have a little bit of a think about, and this, bear with me on the language on this. I stand on the shoulders of giants. My team are going to put during today some links in the chat box. I want you to make sure that you grab those and access those. And one of them is to a book by, and I think the link that they're providing today is for the audiobook on Audible. A woman called Annie Duke, who I believe would be, I think, the world's preeminent expert on uncertainty. Now, Duke wrote a book called Thinking in Bets, and you heard me mention before that I made a bet with myself that people would come if I ran a webinar on uncertainty. And one of the things that Duke speaks to in this book is the notion of assembling what she calls a truth-seeking pod. Now, this isn't about team. In that what we do when we tend to build a team is we tend to seek people who are just a little bit like ourselves. And that's not the aim of a truth-seeking pod. Because the problem I have around people when I attract people who are the same as me or have similar backgrounds, similar skill sets to me, is that we see things the same way. There's just too much agreement. And Duke's provocation is that that's not effective when things are uncertain. It's not effective for me to be able to see everything from the same angle, try something out and then go, how come that didn't work? We all agreed it was brilliant. What we need to do, particularly as schools particularly when we're leading schools where young people are coming back from lockdowns, is I don't even want you to call it a team because we're going to get some sameness around that. We're going to call it a pod, and we're going to be clear that we're talking about diversity. And so the people that you need on this pod are not your leadership team. If you want to have a COVID return pod, then you are going to need maybe one leader. You're going to need one graduate teacher. You're going to need one member of your non-teaching staff. You're going to need a parent representative. You're going to need someone black. You're going to need someone who's LGBTQI. You're going to need a student, so that you have multiple perspectives on what's really going on for people. I can be fabulous at making an assumption, and sometimes I'm right. The problem with my assumptions is they tend to get reinforced when I'm in a team of people who are like-minded. A truth-seeking pod, people who see a certain situation from a variety of different angles, has a better chance of coming up with something that isn't just a normalized agreement, but is the truth. When we hear different perspectives, we start to chisel off these concepts, some of our assumptions and some of our pre-existing baggage and some of our biases when we listen to those stories. As I, for instance, build a board for real schools, an advisory board, I will be looking not for people who are just like me, but I will be looking for people who have completely different perspectives on the thing that I want them to see. Diversity wins when it comes to establishing a truth-seeking pod. And it's the very fundamental reason that we're discovering some very clear shifts around the world in successful big businesses, because the ones that tend to succeed are the ones with women on the boards. So for instance, old pale male and stale stuffed suits, which is the picture that we get of boards of big companies, are falling behind. The more diverse you make your board, the more successful you are likely to be. This is a great thing that you can do in terms of tilting the odds in the favor of success for your school. And that takes me to, I guess, my next point here, which Duke speaks to this notion of thinking about our decisions as being bets. So when we bet, what we have to accept something when we bet, and that is that we could win and that we could lose. Now, you can make a good bet. You could actually do your research. You could, for instance, if you're betting on a horse race, you can go, right, I have worked this out, and this horse has been in fabulous form, and this and all the research that we try to convince ourselves is the right way to do things, and you can be wrong. So good bets sometimes lose, and bad bets sometimes win. And we'll talk a little further in just a moment about that. Means that we need to be perhaps not quite so hung up on whether we are successful or not. But there are examples of this all around us. And what we tend to do as leaders is we look at the result of our bet and then make a decision about whether it was a good bet or not. And that's not so great. So let me give you a couple of examples. For instance, you can make a good bet and lose. Now, people who know me will be well aware that I can bring the Richmond Football Club into almost any subject. So stay with me on this, even if you're finding yourself with your eyes rolling at the moment. In 2019, I went to the AFL Grand Final to watch Richmond play against the GWS Giants. And there was a bit of sort of atmosphere and curiosity as the game start got closer and closer and closer, because the captain of the GWS Giants, a footballer called Phil Davis, who was their star fullback, had a suspect calf injury. And we could even see in the warm-up of the game that they were effectively giving him a little fitness test on the ground to see whether he would be able to play or not. And Davis did some running around and did some kicking and did some marking against a couple of teammates, and coaches came and talked to him, and then he'd go back and do a little more, and then he'd sprint, and then he'd slow jog. And then all of a sudden he just jogged off into the rooms, and we were left to wonder, is Phil Davis going to come out and play the game? And the GWS coaches needed to obviously make a bet. They needed to look at all the evidence they had available to them and say whether they thought that it was worthwhile to put him out there or not. I know, Kelly, poor old GWS. I don't know if Chris Causey, who was a principal friend of ours who was on the board of GWS, is here today, but she'll probably despise me telling this story. They bet on Davis being able to get through the game. And they did that because he had to play on Richmond's star full forward called Jack Riewoldt. Riewoldt kicked 5 goals and Richmond won the game by 89 points. The media the next day looked at the result of that and said they made a bad bet. They got that completely wrong. Phil Davis clearly should never have played. And that's the reason that GWS lost. And I'm a Richmond supporter. I was delighted with that day. It was the most fun I've ever had at the football. It was awesome. But the truth is, I don't think they did make a bad bet. I think they got that right. I think that what the journalists who were writing the next day were not doing was looking at all of the other factors that the GWS coaches had to take into account while they tried to make their bet. Davis was their captain. What message does it send to the rest of the players if he doesn't come out there and run onto the ground with them that day? How do they feel? How does that feeling impact their performance when their star captain isn't on the ground with them? The option that they had about who they were going to play on Revolt that day was an 18-year-old fullback who was listed as an emergency. What might have happened if an experienced, seasoned and successful full forward got to play on a kid that day? Could he have kicked even more than 5? And really, was the game lost only when it got down to Richmond's goals and their full forward managed to get on the end of a few things? Or was the damage further up the ground? I think that given that choice over again, the GWS coaches would make that choice and it'd be a good bet. They just got unlucky that day. Now, if we were to take that concept and extrapolate it a little further, sometimes a bad bet gets up. Sometimes the unexpected thing wins. So, and I think that the perfect example that we've seen of this, and I may be a little bold here and I want you to just stay with me on the concept, was when the NAPLAN results were announced nationally just a few weeks ago. Coming into the NAPLAN results being released, if people were asked, who would you bet on in order to, about who's going to have the best results, then clearly the smart bet, given all the evidence that we had in front of ourselves, had to be that you would not bet on Victoria. More extensive lockdown, more remote learning, more damage in terms of mental health and fatigue of being online than any other state at the time that the NAPLAN tests were sat. Yet all of a sudden, Victoria's NAPLAN results went up at a rate higher than the rest of the country, and we found ourselves scrambling. Politicians, system leaders, looking at the results and going, how do we explain this? And they got up there and started to say things like, it is testament to the hard work of the Victorian teachers. And of course it is. But really, what we're asking ourselves is, did Victorian teachers work harder and better than all of the other teachers in all of the other states? No, they didn't. Were they more adept at online learning? And were the schools better prepared to cater for all of the kids that overperformed at that point? No, they weren't. I think that it's absolute nonsense. I think that what happened there, Victoria got lucky. A few kids in a few places did a bit better than expected, and Victoria's results crept up a little bit against the trend. I think that's what happened that day. Fabulous. But it just doesn't mean anything. When we consider our decisions as bets, we are obsessive about, did we collect enough information? Did we pay enough attention to our own wisdom? Did we look around at our people and go, you know what, this is a good bet? And then what we need to do is just let it go and be a little bit curious about the outcome. Another thing that I want you to take as a very, I guess this time I'm being a little bit more practical about it, is that one of the things that you can't do, one of the risks when there is uncertainty, is planning too far ahead. And I think that some of us have found frustration when it comes to planning at the moment, because we keep talking about the fact that the goalposts keep shifting. Every time we're ready, oh, right, there's an announcement. Poor New South Wales. I mean, the announcements that have been made to New South Wales educators, where they find out by either social media or mainstream media that the date has been changed again for student returns to school. I mean, it's just so cruel, isn't it? So it just shows us that you really can't plan too far ahead. Really clever fellow called Jason Fried, and you can see there that Cassie's posted a link to his website, Basecamp. And he speaks to, and one of the things that Fried did, I wish I'd discovered Basecamp earlier. It's got some of the resources for learning and working remotely there are amazing. Would have been handy to find that before now. But Fried years ago wrote a book called Rework. And he talked about chunking things down into what he calls 6-week projects. Now, I've adapted that. I think 5-week projects work really well in schools because you can get 8 of them done in a year. And if as a leadership team or if as a truth-seeking pod, You say, right, there's obviously so many things you could do. And what we do know is that when we take on the responsibility of doing lots and lots and lots of things, we tend to do none of them, or we do none of them particularly well. We end up with that phenomenon of feeling like we're spinning plates. So what I want to encourage you to do is to start to break that down into opportunistic 5-week projects. Now, my way of being able to set up a 5-week project is this POP model. And I think Cassie's also provided that in the chat box for you to download if you'd like that little picture to take away. The way the POP model works is this. First of all, it's just 4 or 5 little dot points in each box, in each corner. So first of all, we start with current state. We ask ourselves, can we just paint a picture of where we're at with this POP, which is a problem of practice? And I like to kind of put a little tack on the end of that. I like to say it's a problem of practice that's worth solving. So you might say student engagement. Okay, you might say student relationships, as they start to come back. You might say cohesive classrooms. Let's make that a problem of practice that's worth solving. And then current state, where are we at? Well, our kids haven't been in each other's company very much. There could potentially be some latent online angst between them when they come back. Before they left, they were a bit like this. So we just paint a little picture in 4 or 5 dot points. And then what I want you to do is to shoot across diagonally across the POP model to the desired state, to the state that you would like. And the only thing I'm asking for you here around this POP is just to be realistic. Just say, okay, what we'd like is for young people to be in each other's company without too many conflicts to deal with. What we'd like them to do is to be able to speak respectfully on most occasions to their teacher. What we'd like them to do is to report that they have a handful of significant friends at school. Okay, that'd be good. That's our good desired state. Then we step up to strategy. I'm going to talk in a moment about what I mean by selecting strategy that's high return, but effectively what I'm looking for is little things that have the potential for a big return. I think this is a flip. I think a lot of us are familiar with the notion in schools of being asked or choosing to, by our own volition, through our own habits, to implement something really big that changes things just a little. And what we want to ask ourselves when we choose strategy, because you've only got 5 weeks, and this is the beauty of a 5-week project, is it constrains you from taking on too much that's big. What could we get done with the resource that we have? And for a lot of us in schools, that's just our time, our effort, and our energy. So what is it that we could get done in a 5-week period? What could we plan that would make a difference? Now, for instance, you might be thinking a little bit here about, say, I don't know, student connection. It might just be make a great first impression. And one of our partner schools at Wellington High School in New South Wales has been working on that. What would the first day be like? What would the first morning be like? Can we share a meal together? Can we break bread? Can we give our teachers a bunch of strategies that can help the students reconnect as they come back into the classroom? And I'm proud of them for picking something, but all they've done is say first morning. We'll address first contact as a way of re-engaging our students positively and connecting them again in the school. Yeah, we could get that done pretty quickly. And then look at what your measures would be. So you're going to shoot diagonally back across to the bottom left there. And what I want you to do is to be able to say, right, how will we know that this made a difference in the most simple terms? So it might just be, we need a quick survey monkey. It's a pretty cheap and free online way of saying, right, we're going to ask people 5 questions about how connected they feel to the school. We're going to say 5 statements. You might even take them directly from your desired state. How do you feel about having do you feel like you have friendship groups in our school? And we're just going to get the data as they scale themselves from 0 to 10. And then we'll give them the same survey in 5 weeks' time and see where they're at. Did we make an improvement? Now, people sometimes fall for the trap of thinking that, well, yeah, we might focus on that for 5 weeks, but won't it all just disappear? Well, the graph on this isn't like a heartbeat. It's not like it goes up and then disappears. What happens is you do get a relaxing off as you take on another project, as you take on another focus. But what happens is the graph goes up and then it dips back just a little bit in that area and then plateaus. So you've established a significant rise. It's not the peak, but you've established a significant rise in that area by being focused on it for a short period of time. Then you're going to start another project. get a spike, let it drop a little bit, let it ride out. This is the way organisations improve, is through this notion of short projects with clear, low investment, high return strategies. And that's what I want to speak to a little bit next, is can you discard your low return activity? Now, another link that my team will post in the chat box at some stage in the next few minutes is a TED talk by a fella called Bjorn Lomborg. And some of you who've worked with me before will have heard me reference this. We call it, we talk about high return on investment strategy, which means we need to stop and think for a moment, not about what's important, but what is achievable. What could we get done with a low investment that would have the biggest possible return? And I want to put something to you that that I've sort of been listening and thinking a little bit about over the last few weeks. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with a fabulous, actually when I say a few weeks ago, it might be more than a few weeks ago, because I was in Daylesford at a presentation for a group of school leaders in Central Victoria. And an assistant principal at a secondary school. I was chatting with her at lunchtime, and she and I said, how are things? And she said, yeah, it's tough. You know, so yeah, it probably makes sense. What's the toughest? Who are the toughest problems in the, you know, who are the owners of the toughest problems in the school at the moment? And she said, it's the year sevens. And I said, year sevens, right? You know, I said, why the year sevens? Why are they the toughest? And she looked me dead in the eye and she said 2 words. She said, no camp. I said, what? And she said, they just haven't had that opportunity at the start of the year to connect. They haven't become team at all. And as a result, she said, it's kind of Lord of the Flies-ish. It's sort of every man for himself attitude that's existing. And they're all just trying to climb further and further up the pecking order in every interaction. And it's really hard work. So when I think about that, we could bring in a great big respectful relationships program to teach the year sevens across the year. Or we could say, you know what, with 2022 in mind, get the camp organised. Just get the camp organised. I then had a wonderful opportunity, and that was to just a couple of weeks ago to be, and it had a really cool label, a really cool title. I was the conference provocateur for the ACL National Conference, which means I got to just provoke people for 2 days. It was ace. I just absolutely loved it. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But there was a student panel during it. And one of the students in there was asked about what were the things that she was missing about school and what are the things that she's hoping that she'll be able to get to do at school next year. And she said, I just want to go on camp. And it came to me again that here we were in a venue online, hundreds of school leaders coming together to learn from the smartest people in the world around education and how we should be doing it right, hearing big, profound, important messages. The most important message came from a year 9 student and came a few weeks ago from an assistant principal in a secondary school in Central Victoria. Get your camp organised. It's a low effort activity. So we want to discard any activities that are high effort with low return. And we want to keep anything that we can do in our school that is low effort, potentially high return. I think that the cost of not connecting your year sevens, the cost of not connecting your students through something like a camp, and if it's not a camp, make it something else next year, is just too high. And the benefit of just, even if you just made it a sleepover with some adventure stuff and a movie and some popcorn, the benefit of that could be massive in terms of behavioural issues that you just won't have to deal with after that moment. Lomborg, in his TED talk, calls this the economist's mindset, because he says economists don't argue about what's important. And as a leadership team, there is very little point when uncertainty is in play in getting together and arguing about all those big, profound things that we think are really important in schools. It's the wrong mindset, because everything can be made to sound important. Is numeracy important? Is literacy important? Is STEM important? we could go forever on this. Everything can be made to sound important with words. We're not looking for importance. We're looking for high return on investment. What's the smallest thing we could do that would have the highest possible return? And I think camps is just a fabulous example of that. And probably the number 6 that I wanted to bring up to you today comes, as I mentioned, out of my work a couple of weeks ago at the ACL National Conference. I had to admit I was a bit fanboy. So in the pre-conference speaker briefings, there I am sitting there, and Parsi Salberg comes on, and Mary Jane Gallagher comes on, all these people that I've kind of considered in some way sort of heroes and celebrities in the education world. I'm getting to have these conversations with them, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then I get the chance to have them listen to them speak and then ask them questions after it to provoke them. I had a really fun couple of days. And I ran myself a project during the day, because I guess it's one of the things you do when you meet your heroes, is that you hope for some common ground. You hope that what you've been saying and what you've been thinking is something that they might nod to. And I did have a little moment when Michael Fullen said, "That's a great question, Adam," because you're looking for that overlap. And so what I did was keep a little tally. And I was looking in all of the presentations that were made that I got to attend. Some of the breakouts, I don't get to go to all of them, but all the ones that I was sitting there and taking notes and listening intently to, I wanted to know which of them mentioned my topic, which is school culture. Which of them mentioned culture as we went? And the 15 people that you can see on the screen there all said that it was critically important that we create a culture where people can thrive. We create a culture where people are heard. We create a culture where people are enabled and mobilized behind a vision that a really clever and patient and empathic leader has provided for people. And I found that incredibly affirming. What I found a little challenging was that not many of them went much further. Not many of them went to explaining to people what is culture and what do we mean and how do we get started to work on culture. They just told us that it's important. And I have a feeling that a lot of them know what they mean by that. But I have a feeling that the advice about how to tackle culture from many of them would be different. So what I want to do is bring culture into sharper attention before we finish. And I want to do it through emphasizing a couple of little things that I hope back up what I was saying earlier about low investment, high return. So when it comes to culture, there's a model here that we've developed around using restorative practices as the underpinning platform of a culture of a successful school. A culture that not only accepts that there are going to be behaviours in the culture that we love and there are going to be behaviours that we'd rather not have, but they have agreed on their methodology for tackling it. And the school has a really explicit framework for being able to understand it. That people look at culture and they look at practice through the same plan. It's a really simple plan. It's just got 3 lenses there. I unpack it in my book, Restoring Teaching. Yes, that was the plug bit. And Chris has provided it in the chat box, the link there. Teachers can get copies of Restoring Teaching for free. So all you need to do is pay the postage and handling. If you're interested, click on that link that's there now, make your order, and you'll have a copy in your hand straight away. And all we do is we speak to in Restoring Teaching about 3 key areas: language, conduct, and mindset. Language. We call it affective language. So not effective, affective language. Thank you, Helen. I really appreciate that. Affective language is pretty much just say what you're already going to say, but chuck in a feeling to it. So when you see a young person do the wrong thing, you might tell them, "I'm frustrated to see you do that." But they work positively as well. So it can be, "I'm delighted to see you do that." You might even tack on that that's something that we value in terms of our values. So, "I'm delighted to see that you do that. Did you know that's respect?" Or it might be, "I'm frustrated to see you do that. Did you know that's disrespectful?" So there's ways to kind of establish it, but you know what? Sometimes you don't have time and you've just got to go frustrated, delighted. I presented this one day at a secondary school, And there was a young man sitting near the front on the front table, and he sort of grinned when I was talking about it. And I said, "What's going on for you?" And he said, "I hear you." He said, "And it makes sense." But he said, "I am a graduate teacher." And he said, I'm my first year of teaching. And he said, "I've lived in this town all of my life. And the kids that I teach are 16, 17. He said, they play footy at the same footy club as me. They see me outside." And he said, "The behavior that I would love to address is swearing in my classroom." He said, "But I just can't see these 17-year-old boys responding when I tell them that I'm frustrated or I'm disappointed in them." I said, "Okay." I said, "Would you be brave enough to give it a crack for me?" He said, "Yeah, I'll run it and I'll let you know how it went." So I was back in the school a couple of weeks later, and I said, "How'd you go with the swearing thing?" And he said, "Yeah, it was interesting." And he said the boys came in for another boys' PE lesson, and he was writing on the board, and he said it was about 15 seconds when one of them swore, and he turned and he said to this young man, "Disappoints me when you swear like that. Makes me feel you don't respect my teaching." And he turned and went back to writing on the board. And he said he was writing and he was ducking. Oh, he's going to wear something. He said there was this awkward, weird silence behind him. And he said it was about another, maybe a minute or so before the next high quality, top shelf swear word was said. And he said he turned on a heel and faced this young person and was about to hit them with a very similar sentence. And a kid next to him elbowed him and said, "Oh, you better not talk like that. You might disappoint him again." I said, "Right." And he said, I said, "So they picked up on it?" He goes, "Yeah, in a kind of take the mickey kind of way." I said, "Right." I said, "Did it get rid of swearing?" And he said, "No." And I thought, I didn't think so. I said, "Did it improve it at all?" And he said, "I reckon by about 70%. Talk about low investment, high return. Imagine that if just adjusting your language in a sentence that costs you about a second could potentially reduce a certain problematic behavior in your classroom by 70%. Economist's mindset on that. From a conduct point of view, we talk about us as educators and how we approach, for instance, conflict. And we have a model called P3, P3, F3, because I don't know about you, that when certain student groups come and they've had conflict as a group, it's an hour of my life that I will never get back. And I often feel that I've made it worse. So we have a model called P3, P3, F3 that we train people on, which is to talk about 3 minutes about the past, 3 minutes about the present, and 3 minutes about the future. And in the future bit, we list the things that we're going to do to fix the problem themselves. And we position ourselves as someone who just checks in to make sure they've done it. One, it saves me 51 minutes every time I do it. Lower investment. And two, it puts me in that position where I get to preserve my relationship with the young people, and I get to live out a cultural belief that I have, which is that punishment doesn't long-term change anything. But having the right practice framework for our teachers can teach the young people that we work with that they can solve problems themselves by taking action. That's how you teach responsibility. You certainly don't learn responsibility by making a poster about it on a Wednesday afternoon. And mindset. One of the things that we speak to our partner schools about regularly is to become unattached to outcomes, but obsessive about process. And this goes to what I was talking about before about making good bets. Just gather the information, just put in place the tactics, the language, the conduct, the architecture for your classroom, the pedagogy that gives you the best possible chance of winning. And then see how you go. Sometimes you'll do it all brilliantly, and you're giving yourself a 90% chance of success. And sometimes, and you'll still fail. And there's certainly been times in my career when I haven't got it right, but the kids let me get away with it. So it's not about whether we have done everything right or not. It's about have we just tilted the odds in our favor, and we're curious about the outcome, but we're not worried about whether our horse wins or loses. We're just saying, did I give my horse every possible chance? This is a new mindset for teachers. And that'll happen to us, won't it, after 20 odd years of outcomes-based education? But it's a fabulous opportunity. And it's certainly for me been liberating. And it's also allowed me to be more effective and less stressed in my work. And that leaves you with the so what, now what? So for instance, if that's something that you would like to discuss for your school, then there's a link that's going to be coming up in the chat box. I think it's probably nearly already there, which is my Calendly link. And you can click on that link and you can make a meeting time with me. Chris has jumped in with it. Fabulous. Okay. And the other thing you can do is you may be sitting there going, actually, I want to get something organized about this pretty quick. All right. So my mobile number is on the screen. I only ever put my mobile number up there when I'm working with school leaders who have decided that they have something on their hands, that it's an emergency, it's a red light going off for them, and they want to act now before this webinar ends. If you send me an SMS to that, I will know that you want to have a chat about your school reasonably quickly. It can be a chat that's about how you're handling the uncertainty piece at the moment, and it can be a chat about how we might be able to help you. It's entirely up to you. Just flick me a text and we'll make that happen for you. And the only other reminder that I had for you is that we're trying hard at Real Schools at the moment to be of service. I hope that today's webinar has been of service to you. And I'm going to keep running a few over the next few weeks to try and help out. So the next registration link for the webinar that I'm going to run next week is in the chat box. And it's going to be around a topic called the Comeback Kid, which is the specific things that schools need to pay attention to give a young person, odds tilted in their favour, the very best possible chance of successfully returning. Now, I know that we've got some schools who are already returning and we're kind of in the middle of that returning period. It's okay. There's the opportunity to kind of backtrack a little bit here. And this is a webinar that we are opening up to principals, to assistant principals, wellbeing coordinators, teachers, non-teaching staff, anyone who wants to come and thinks they could get something from this, then please make sure that you jump on it. We've created a little infographic that has 8 key areas that need to be paid attention to in order to tilt the odds as far as we can in our favour. And I will spend an hour unpacking each of those and providing opportunity for schools to steal some ideas and some tactics that they can take back to their school straight away. So I want to encourage you to jump on that one and enjoy it. Now, that brings me to the end. How'd I go? 47 minutes. Okay, 2:47 it is now. Fabulous. Which means that I've got the opportunity, if you're still here, to answer any questions. Thank you, Kellys. I appreciate that. And David, if there's anything that you wanted to ask, then use the chat box. There is a Q&A section, but I forget to use it all the time. So if you've got anything that you want to pop in there, then you can. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is what I always do with a webinar, which is I have a soft ending. Which means I'm just going to sit here and watch the attendee list for a few minutes and let you all drift off. You don't have to provide applause. Your appreciation is accepted gratefully in the chat box there to the people, Lisa and Melissa, that are really appreciate that. Thank you. Christine, suggestions on how to keep staff connected who are unable to work on site. Yeah, I think that there's, multiple channels for me is the key for that one, Christine. So yes, there's an opportunity to send a text message. 2, there's an opportunity to Zoom it up and get that conversation going. 3, it can be a recorded video message so they don't have to kind of interact, but they feel your presence. 4, drive-bys. I don't know if anyone remembers early in the pandemic, we did one. We had a guy here that we were trying to keep connected. It's his 50th birthday. We're all friends. So we all jumped in the car and drove past him and sang happy birthday as we stood, as we hung out of the windows of the car. So I want you to be creative and use multiple channels. We are all, and here we are in a Zoom webinar. We are all Zoomed to death. So look for different ways that you can connect with other people. People are really appreciating that at the moment, all the way down to a handwritten note, a card in the mail, anything that would allow a person to know that somebody somewhere thought of them. Melissa, our school community has lost some students in a horrific accident. Poor. Any suggestions for making school mean something for these kids? Yeah, that's a really tough one, Melissa. You know what? I actually won't even answer that one publicly, Melissa. But if you would go back up the chat and click on the link to book a time with me. I'm going to put some thought into that, and we can have a conversation about that. It's not a conversation where I'm trying to sell you a set of steak knives. That's something that I'm happy to workshop a little bit with you if you'd like to. Oh, you people are so nice. Miss Daria, thank you for coming along. Hybrid classrooms are a big challenge for big students and teachers now, massive stressor, and we need help. Any advice? So I'm assuming, David, by hybrid, you're talking about co-teaching. So I think that that's a really important aspect at the moment. That's how teachers actually connect and work together. There's a fabulous resource. I'm going to get you to Google just because I haven't got the link available at the moment. Very original title called A Guide to Co-Teaching, which is great for, it's by Villa, Thousand and Nevin, I think, are the authors. Fabulous book with some really practical stuff around how we can, one, get the pedagogy right, and secondly, how we can have people preserve relationships. Hybrid in Victoria for us means swapping remotely to in-person twice every week, backwards and forwards on that. Yeah, okay. One, for that, I think what we need to do is to be really clear with people about the lines. So kids can actually understand where lines are if we have signals for them. So if you think about a sporting game, we come into the sporting game and we kind of compete, and there are rules around the way we compete. There's a sportsmanship thing, but it's pretty fierce. Okay, but there's a signal at the end of it, and that is that we shake hands. Okay, and all of a sudden, people who have been fierce enemies for an hour and a half are now best friends while they have a drink after the game. We can get those signals going with the kids. So as they come in, we can even get them, for our younger students, we can get them chanting about the fact that, you know, we're happy to be back in the room. This is how we're back in the room. You know, then we might have a signal that says we're going online and we're going to be fine, and we all chuck each other a high 10 as we walk out. You know, so little signals that help them understand that, okay, we're going from one context into another and we've got a plan. So anxiety often born from the absence of a plan. And if you can let the kids know we've got a plan for both, then that sometimes can do some of the work. Thank you for helping me out. Thank you to my team for chucking that in there as well. Appreciate them providing those useful links to people. High levels of anxiety, yeah, among staff, parents, students about the return to school. Any tips for helping people support? So, Kesha, I am going to cover that in a bit more detail in a webinar in a couple of weeks. I'm wondering if my team can be quick enough to find the link for the heroic principle. We're going to talk specifically more around how you can kind of communicate effectively as a school leader in terms of being able to allay anxiety amongst people. So please make sure you come along to that one, Kesha. What people are looking for in anxiety is a very distinct feeling of, it's okay, we've got this. And so when we complain publicly, we give people an impression that we haven't got it, but we don't know what's going on. Okay. And one of the rules around effective communication is to communicate, even when you've got nothing to communicate. So that gives you the opportunity to give people not so much new information, but when they hear repeated information about we've got the plan, some of that anxiety can definitely drop away if they know you've got this under control. So I'll elaborate that on a lot further when we do the heroic school leader. Kesha, so come along to that one. Hope to see you there, Dee. Thanks for coming along. The people at Kalinda, good. I know. If you're going to follow me on Twitter, Kalinda, there's the it's fraud, isn't it? You know, you get a little bit of education stuff, but the price you pay is some tweets about the Richmond Football Club. You're amazing people. Whoops, didn't realize I was logged into the school. Not the worst thing that's happened online. Don't worry about it. See, there's a fellow Tiger there. Thank you. It was great to have you here. We'll be back. It's just a gap year. No biggie. All right, folks. I think the chat box has sufficiently calmed. I'm going to let you have a look. I got a Q&A there as well. Oh, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. So I think I can let you wonderful people go. All right. Good luck with that uncertainty. Hope this was useful for you. See you soon.